Yo, Atlas speaking, and welcome to part 2 of What If I Was Reborn into the Bleach universe and became a hollow with a system. Let the tale begin. Chapter 21, My Body. Earlier in the same warehouse. Rain woke up with a massive headache, making it hard to even form a coherent thought. Where am I? What happened? She wondered in a daze. The last she remembers is leaving the office building. She heard a car door slam, was grabbed by someone, and then nothing. She tried to get up, but couldn't. She tried to focus and noticed she was cuffed to some chair. Her arms were cuffed behind her and her legs were cuffed to the legs of the chairs, making it impossible for her to move much at all. When she opened her eyes she saw. Well, it just looked like some kind of bland room. There was a couch and a coffee table. A desk and some chairs. No windows though. She could literally be anywhere. There also wasn't anyone else there. Why did I get taken? Does someone know about Hisashi? Or is this related to the company? Did we piss someone off? She tries to think about all her recent interactions. Anything from business meetings that didn't end well all the way down to any bad dates she had. Nothing really stood out as glaringly bad though. Her personal life had been pretty mundane in recent times, dead brother returning as a monster notwithstanding. The company had been so busy she hadn't had all that much time to be dating or hanging out with people for non-business reasons. No disgruntled employees she could think of. The company was still small enough to where she knew most of the other employees. Though with the company's rapid growth they may have stepped on some people's feet, none of it seemed serious enough to warrant this though. While she was caught up in her thoughts she heard someone unlocking the door. Before they could notice she had woken up, she closed her eyes and slumped down in the chair. A few people come in at the same time. She should wake up soon, the first says. It stood out that we're speaking in English rather than Japanese like she was expecting. We can make the call when she wakes up, he continues. Are you sure they can get the money? A second one questions. The money is nice, but what we really want is their code for generating digital certificates and signatures. We can sell it for a lot more, the first explains to him. She needs to buy as much time as she can, either for Hisashi or the police to notice she is gone and track her down. The best way for now is to continue faking being unconscious. Though they kept talking, it seemed they were prepared against being listened into, as they didn't talk about anything that could be used to identify them, what their history was, or if they were part of some kind of organization. Nothing in relationship to themselves nor their group were talked about except limited completely to their current actions. Alright, we don't have that long. We need to get moving. Suddenly she was slapped. Damn, that hurt. She wouldn't be able to continue faking it or it would get very suspicious. She saw there were 3 guys in the room. They were wearing what looked like the kind of gear a SWAT team would wear, including the balaclava, making it impossible to recognize and remember them. It was quite obvious they were professionals of some kind. They didn't talk nor look like a hastily put together group. The man that slapped her was close enough for her to notice he had distinct bright blue eyes, which she made sure to remember. The other 2 were too far to notice anything distinctive at all. Bring the phone. Also make sure the rest of the team is on alert, the main guy said. Brother, where are you? She though worried whether he would find her. As she thought of her brother, she suddenly felt her chest get hot to the point where she felt like she was burning up. Something seemed to be pulling at her wrist too, while the burning sensation started moving from her chest down her arm and into the bracelet. After a few moments of this flowing sensation, suddenly she felt the bracelet move from her wrist into her hand. It felt like some kind of cold rod. As soon as it finished moving, she felt she was overflowing with energy. Like she had just downed an entire 6-pack of energy drinks. What's going on with my body, she thought. The temperature around her started climbing rapidly. The cuffs caught fire, slowly turned red hot before turning a blinding white. In moments they started melting off her despite not burning her skin at all. The remaining slag hit the ground with a sizzle. She stood up and saw a beautiful ornate silver scepter in her hand. In the head of it was the gemstone from her bracelet, caged by the silver. Intuitively she felt a connection with it. A small flame appeared above the gem. When she focused on it, it rapidly grew before bursting out into a stream that set fire to the ceiling. After exerting her will on it though, she was able to direct it and send it to the closest guy. The other two tried to put out the fire, but before they even got the chance she fired off the fireball that had been the source of the flaming stream. It hit and exploded, covering all three of them in more fire like some kind of napalm bomb. In her anger and being fed by her spirit power, her fire seemed alive and growing faster than a normal fire, engulfing the entire room in barely any time at all. She noticed she felt something familiar heading their way outside of the room. What's this? She wondered and turned towards the door. The guys weren't a threat anymore anyway. The wall burst open, revealing Hisashi, though she was the only one that could see him. Chapter 22, All Over. Reina wasn't able to talk at all due to the speed they were moving at being high enough to take her breath away. Before she could even fully adjust to it, they appeared in a dark alley walking distance from their home. Hisashi carefully let her down. The scepter transformed back into her bracelet, practically confirming his suspicions. He made sure to give her a moment to catch her breath. "How are you feeling?" he asked her, concerned. "It's okay now," she said. "You can't go back yet. A lot happened, so we need to get your story straight." "First off, what happened and why were you there?" he asked her, wondering what was even going on for her to be in such a situation. "I was leaving the office when they grabbed me. I was out for a bit after that. When I woke up, I was already in that building. I heard a car door behind me before they grabbed me, so they must have knocked me out and dragged me into a car and driven me there," she says, making it clear how it all started. "So they were waiting for you near your car. I would have suggested getting bodyguards, but I guess that isn't going to be necessary anymore," he chuckles dryly. "Yeah, I don't think normal people can kidnap me anymore. I faked being asleep for a while and they talked. They were targeting me because of the company. They were going to use me to get money, some of the code and keys to sell," she explains. It made more sense now. He could have expected this with the international media exposure and the company even attracting the attention of the government now. He had just overestimated Japan's safety. Well, the safety aside from supernatural threats. Originally, it would have been good for the police to know about the event and investigate further. The place going up in flames and you coming out completely unscathed means that probably isn't the smartest anymore, though, he tells her. "Okay, that makes sense," she nods in agreement. They would definitely have questions for her if she showed up the way she was now compared to how they left the warehouse behind. Not only was there a massive fire, when he ran out with her to get away from the fire and avoid being noticed by authorities, he might have busted through a few walls. With that fire, most of the evidence of your presence should already be pretty well covered up. Also, though I destroyed some of the walls, they will likely attribute that to the fire as long as it's left to burn for a little longer, he guesses. "So what do we do now?" "What was that power?" she asks him. He sees she is shaking a little, though. He isn't sure if it's just from the adrenaline wearing off or more. "Awakening that power would have put a lot of strain on your body, even more so after being drugged, knocked out and kidnapped. You need to get some rest. Meanwhile, I will go back and spend the night on watch there in case they have more members or some kind of backup to come checking on them. We will talk about that power tomorrow," he told her before leaning over and gently pressing his forehead against her. This was the closest he could do to show affection, since his size and blades for arms means he couldn't hug her as he was now. She wrapped her arms around his mask to hug him back. "Thank you for being there. I love you," she tells him softly. It was obvious that though she was pumped with adrenaline and her new power, she was still quite affected by the whole situation. "I love you too, sis," he says back. He sent her off and watched her walk home to make sure she got there before heading back to the warehouse. When he got there, the fire had grown massively, engulfing the entire warehouse already, and caught the attention of some people that were watching from the distance in interest. It also didn't take long for police and shortly after firefighters to start showing up. It took quite a while for the fire to be put out, likely due to the fact the fire wasn't a natural one. Meanwhile, he made sure to keep his spiritual senses scanning the area for any suspicious movements. He had to adjust his sense a little to pay more attention to lower spirit power individuals, since usually he completely surpasses those from his senses, or he would have to deal with far too much information and possibly miss the important ones. This was going to be a long night. while I have nothing much to do anyway. System, what was that skill I got? He asks his system. Energy blade. Allows the user to clad any blade-like object with his spirit power. Can be used either as an enhancement to the blade itself or fired off upon performing a slashing or thrusting action as a ranged attack. Sweet, so I can do stuff like Getsuga Tensho now. He wondered, quite excited about playing around with this new skill. Answer, affirmative. A similar move to Getsuga Tensho could be performed using the skill and firing it off during a slashing action. Firing it off during a thrust would produce something more akin to an energy ray instead. Damn, I need to train this skill as soon as I finish up business here. I can't really practice this in the city though. If it is even anywhere even close to Getsuga Tensho in power, then firing it off is not going to be environmentally friendly. It would probably also draw the entire local Shinigami squad if I did, even if it does turn out that spirit power concealment is powerful enough to conceal its spirit power emission, he thinks to himself. Chapter 23, Your Body. He waited by the warehouse all night while making sure his spiritual senses covered over a mile beyond the remains of the building, but even after the fire department put out the fire and the police cordoned off the area, leaving very few people to handle the wreckage and investigation, no one suspicious showed up all night. Hopefully this was an isolated group and we got rid of the whole group at once. Having the police investigate would have been preferable in case it wasn't, but I guess not everything can go your way. At least she is fine, and it seems like they might not have other members or backup, he thinks to himself. He will be making sure to keep a closer eye on his sister for the next few days at least though, even if it means slowing down his grinding temporarily. He can't risk there still being more of them and then taking further action. Though she can probably protect herself now, he sighs. Part of him is happy she has the power to protect herself now, but that is in regular human society. Being a Fullbringer means she might be nearly completely safe from normal humans, but there are other dangers to keep in consideration for a Fullbringer. He would want to find a Fullbringer to teach her. If he could, he would want to teach her himself. However, with both him being a hollow and the way he learns system skills, although he is very proficient at using his skills, teaching someone else not so much. He doesn't want her to get involved with Tsukushin and Kugo Jinjo though, so getting a Fullbringer's teacher is off the table too. He will have to figure something out eventually. He returns to his home early in the morning to meet up with Reina. After breakfast, Reina quickly runs out and gives him a hug. So, why do I have power? She asks excitedly, shaking his arm. It seems a good night of rest took the edge off yesterday's events. So it seems you were affected enough by my spirit power to become a Fullbringer, which is a high spirit power human being with hollow spirit power mixed in, he says. Why is it called that? Are you just making that up? She asks. She could kind of make sense of hollow with the hole he had in his chest, but Fullbringer just seemed like weird name. Well, it allows you to bring out the soul of objects. Hence the bringer part, he says, avoiding the reason why he knows these names. Her finding out and explaining being a hollow was already unintentional and a lot to explain. Explaining that he was actually reincarnated was a whole other level of complicated to explain, let alone the implications that in his former life this whole world was a work of fiction. No need for those kinds of nihilistic discussions when it didn't matter anyway. He felt like he was still real, and the same went for his feelings regarding his family. So what does that mean? Well, I don't know the exact details as I don't have any experience with it, and though your powers do have a relation to hollows, it's a very distant connection. My powers work on a very instinctual level, considering hollow are normally little more than mindless beasts, he explains. For example, by manipulating the soul in objects you should be able to affect them to some degree, such as moving them, but also assist in your own movement. Or by condensing or fixing in place water or air, you could stand on those. There's probably a lot you could do by using this part of your power in creative ways. He starts explaining the possibilities of her power. However, your power, unlike mine since you don't have a spirit body, relies heavily on your physical body. Meaning to improve your ability to use your power you would need to improve your body, he tells her with a teasing tone. Wait, I have to exercise? That's not fair, she responds with a frown on her face. Though she is healthy, she's more of the bookworm type than the gym type. Yep, The stronger your physique, the more power you will be able to use in turn. He nods. Arg. Fine. At least I have powers, she says, crossing her arms and pouting. If he had lips he would have smirked. She might have gotten a lot older, but she still had her adorable moments. Well, moving on. Another part of your power is what you did back in the warehouse. Sometimes for items you have a particularly strong connection with, you are able to pull out their soul and infuse your own soul to manifest them into objects with special powers. I can't tell you much about the powers you got from yours since it's not some kind of standardized power. Each is completely unique to its owner and the object, he says. Okay, so I'll need to experiment. She's already stopped pouting, having long forgotten that she was annoyed when thinking of her new powers. Also, after the bad news, there is some good news. Just like how my hollow spirit power is what lead to you awakening you, it should also continue to stimulate your Fullbringer's powers simply by being around me, he told her. Though he knew it would be a much smaller effect than she would experience if he brought her to Hueco Mundo with him, but that wasn't a risk he was willing to take, so it was better to avoid telling her about this. She was looking even more excited, finding there was a way to get stronger with minimal effort simply by hanging out with Hisashi. You'll still need to exercise though, he crushed her hopes immediately. We'll try to figure out some better ways to improve your power over time. For now just focus on improving your physique and experimenting with your power, he says. Chapter 24, Babe. The time of Masaki's attack was rapidly approaching, and thankfully he had gotten to the point where he should be able to crush Grand Fisher quite easily. Just over a month had passed since the kidnapping. Reina had done a great job training outside of her office hours. She wasn't that powerful, but she was powerful enough to where she should be able to defeat a weak hollow if she had to and run away from the average ones. After some experimenting, she also found out that she wasn't only able to use fire with her scepter, but other elements as well. It seemed she had become something like a sorceress. Meanwhile, it was best to not say anything about him trying out his energy blade. He definitely didn't accidentally destroy part of a forest and mountain when he got too excited and pumped a lot of spirit power into the move. Mission: Save Kurosaki Masaki. Reward: Skill transcribed. Sweet, I'll even get a reward, he thought to himself. Hisashi told Reina he was going to have to leave to take care of some important business in Karakura town for a few months, but that he should be back within 2 to 3 months at the most. He also made sure to remind her to run if she ran into anything supernatural while he was gone. If things got really bad, she could also come find him in Karakura town. Hisashi made sure to make himself invisible before spreading his wings and taking off into the sky. He didn't want any Shinigami to notice him while flying. Although his walking speed was faster, there was no way to move in a straight direction in urban areas, making flying quicker. Well, there was a way to move in a straight line in urban areas, but it involved a lot of property destruction and death. Naruki City and Karakura town were actually very close to each other, so it only took him about half an hour of flying to get there. Upon landing, he used his illusory aura to make him look like a slightly older version of his human self to fool any spiritually aware beings and practice his ability. He ended up deciding to make himself look 23 like he had been at the end of his first life, though with the looks of his second life. He gives himself some well-fitted black jeans and a deep purple button shirt. He was walking around exploring Karakura town at a slower pace, trying to locate the Kurosaki clinic. Though he knew what the place looked like when he came across a spectacled college beauty with long wavy violet hair and purple eyes was walking towards him on the street. She was wearing a loose cream-colored hoodie and a black dress that came to just above her knees under it, but the hoodie did little to hide her impressive figure. She was also wearing some matching black kitten heel shoes. Something seemed to have upset her as she was walking quite uncomfortably. She seemed to be mumbling something a lot to herself. He thinks he could make out, and it's nothing. She has quite a nice figure. Kind of a babe, really. People having natural violet, pink or blue hair is still a bit of an adjustment even after all these years. I'm not complaining though, he says to himself. Suddenly she started flushing red before glaring at him. You can't hear me, right? He says, hoping the timing of her reaction was just a coincidence. By now she had stopped walking a little away from him and nodded hesitantly. In that case I'm just a figment of your imagination. He tries to make up something on the spot. He doesn't tend to get seen by normal people besides his sister. She obviously wasn't buying it and he sighed. I'm sorry, I didn't think anyone could hear or see me. That was still rude of me though, he bows to her along with his apology. She was still a little flushed and responded timidly, it's okay. Well, Miss Saito Hisashi, a pleasure to meet you, he says. Haruko, she gives her first name, too embarrassed to say more. Well, in that case you can call me Hisashi, he says and winks at her playfully. By now she seems to have moved from embarrassed and angry to embarrassed and shy. Well, since we ran each other, I was wondering if you could help me a little, he says. Okay, she nods timidly. I'm new to town and looking for the Kurosaki clinic, but can't find it for the life of me. Could you help me find it? He smiles with some embarrassment. This would be super easy if he could just check the address book, but illusions aren't physical and he still doesn't have hands. She has a kind smile. Of course I can, she says and walks up beside him. She tried to grab his arm while they walked, but he quickly and awkwardly moved aside since his appearance was purely visual and if she touched him, well, it would be bad. Sorry, I have a social phobia. I'm working on it though, he said. But you seem to be talking with me just fine, she responded, narrowing her eyes in suspicion. Ha ha ha, well, it used to be so bad I couldn't even talk to people. Now talking is fine though, the irony that his excuse wasn't even completely a lie, since he couldn't talk to anyone until his sister, wasn't lost on him. Her eyes become a little less suspicious. Is that so? She asks. If it weren't, how could I avoid a cute girl such as yourself? He teased her, hoping that by teasing and complimenting her she might forget about his strange behavior. The slowly receding blush came back in full force and she did completely forget about it while she took him to the clinic while sharing some small talk. It was also helpful to find out a little more about the area and Haruko herself. Honestly, it's an absolute pleasure to be able to talk to another person. I love my sister, but although it's better than when I was able to talk to nobody, one person isn't enough, he thinks to himself. Chapter 25, The Kurosakis. Hisashi could finally see the clinic he had been searching for, though he wasn't in a hurry anymore. Being able to talk and walk with a cute girl was a much better way to do this. Well, Haruko, it's been an absolute pleasure to get to know you. Thanks for the help too, you're a lifesaver, he smiles and told her. She gives him a brilliant smile. Me too. Are you going to be in town? She asked nervously. I should be in town for the next 2 or 3 months, he says. Do you think we could, meet again? She asks, hopefully twirling her hair with her finger. Well, I have probably 2 months of time to waste just keeping an eye on the Kurosaki family, and it has been fun talking with her, he then shrugs. Sure, where can I usually find you? He asked, since he couldn't give his residence that he didn't have. She blushed furiously after being asked where she lived. I'm currently staying at the women's dorms of Karakura University, she responded. Alright, do you have a phone in your room or is there a shared one in the dorm? He asked her. She gave him the dorm number and extension for her room along with the general directions to Karakura University. I'll see you there then, he said with a smile. After she leaves, he turns his attention to the Kurosaki clinic down the street. It looks just like it did in the show, with the reception out front of the house. He walks into an abandoned nearby alley where, once out of sight, had went from looking like an older form of his former self to being invisible, and double checks that his spirit power is still completely concealed before coming back out, walking by the front of the building to get a closer look. In the clinic reception, he can see Masaki on reception duty while a tiny Ichigo is helping her. Yuzu and Karen are both playing. Karen, unsurprisingly, is bouncing a ball around the room. Seems like her interest started this early on. Meanwhile, Yuzu has 2 wooden dolls that are playing with each other. Unlike in the show, Ichigo was very different. He was a very bright kid sporting a huge smile as he helped the patients. Quite unlike his signature emo personality he had in the show. Hisashi almost felt bad about still making him go through the grief of losing his mother and feeling like he was responsible. Unfortunately for Ichigo, his current plan was as much risk as he was comfortable taking on, no matter how much empathy he felt for the family losing Kurosaki Masaki. At least they would get her back eventually, unlike his first family, and he hasn't been to talk to his parents for years and probably wouldn't for many years to come. He felt 6 years of grief was very little in comparison, and he wasn't going to risk himself and his family's safety to solve that too. When I get to Vasto Lord or Arrancar levels of power, I can possibly think of interfering in the timeline to reduce risk to myself and those close to me. However, until this is the largest amount of change. It didn't take long for him to see Ishin while he let out a patient. It took even less time to see him acting a fool. Unlike Ichigo, some things don't change, I guess. He sits down and uses one of the wood dolls to play with little Yuzu animatedly while waiting for the next patient to show up. Ichigo is definitely a mama's boy. Even with his father out of the office now, he is still completely focused on helping his mom and getting her attention. He was thinking about how to handle this. One thing that was very helpful was the weather situation during Masaki's death. He doesn't know exactly when it will happen, just that it should be somewhere in the next 3 months, but he knows it will be raining when it happens, meaning he only has to be on high alert when it rains. Imagine having to stalk someone with 100% focus for 3 months straight. It would drive you insane. While he was keeping an eye on the family, he reviewed his progress over the past month. Plus 45,000 XP from Hollow. Plus 2250 XP from Animal Spirits. Plus 150 XP from Pluses or Humans. XP, 14,210 out of 30,860. Plus 1 levels. Plus 1 stat points. XP, 30,750 out of 31,650. Plus 450 spirit power from Hollow. Plus 2 spirit power from Pluses or Humans. Plus 30 spirit power from passive absorption. Spirit power, 18,712 to 19,194. Status panel, he told the system. Status panel. Name, Saito Hisashi. Soul age, 52. Race, Hollow. Rank, Hollow. Level, 78 to 79. XP, 30750/31650. Stats. Strength, 34 to 35. Dexterity, 45. Constitution, 15. Intelligence, 20. Spirit power, 18,712 to 19,194. Available stat points, 0. Passive skills. Spiritual energy absorption. High-speed regeneration. Acidic touch. Active skills. Soul-body separation. Spirit power concealment. Illusory aura. Blut. Energy blade. The leveling speed was reaching a cap of what he could achieve with regular Hollow. Despite expanding his patrol range and speed as much as he could handle with his growing powers in the past month, he still didn't even manage to go up 2 levels. Thankfully, spirit power wasn't on such a curve and still grew quite a bit. If it hadn't been for that, he would have felt quite desperate staying on Earth and delaying his evolution. While he is in Karakura town, he also won't be able to patrol either like he was in Naruki City, since he needed to keep an eye on the Kurosaki family, and also if there was suddenly a steep drop in the amount of Hollow in Karakura town, no matter how well he could hide using his illusory aura and spirit power concealment, such a change is going to catch the attention of Aizen and probably Kasuke. This would slow down his progress until he was out of Karakura town again. At least he would be able to focus on practicing his skills while he was in town. At least he would be practicing his illusory aura and spirit power concealment non-stop the whole time, since he refused to reveal his true appearance at any point during his stay, just in case he does somehow get spotted by anyone. He would be either invisible or in a different appearance at all times. Chapter 26, Stalking. Hisashi had been watching the Kurosaki family, focusing mostly on Masaki and Ichigo. On days where it would rain, he followed them closely, but on sunny days he was comfortable just keeping an eye on them from a distance using his spirit senses while he focused on his own progress, such as training his skills. After almost 2 months, he had managed to get a pretty good feel for their schedule. Masaki spent most of her time caring for the kids and helping out as the receptionist of Kurosaki Clinic during the office hours. When she wasn't working as receptionist, she would usually either be with her kids, taking care of the home, or doing shopping. Ishin spent most of the day as the doctor of Kurosaki Clinic taking care of patients and spent whatever he could outside of that with his wife and kids. Looking at his face annoyed Hisashi a little though, since if Ishin had been just a little faster back then, Hisashi might not have died to wife. It was irrational as he knew Ishin wasn't really to blame, but you can't will yourself to not be frustrated if that's the way you feel. Besides school, Ichigo liked to go to karate, a local dojo, to practice and spend time with Tatsuki Arisawa. He got beat a lot. He didn't have many other friends to spend time with, as most had already judged him to be the weird ghost kid and avoided him like the plague. Meanwhile, Yuzu and Karen spent most of the time either at kindergarten or at home being taken care of by Masaki. At only 5 years old, the twins were still too young to have any real hobbies outside of the home. The only other familiar character from Bleach that I had come across was Tatsuki Arisawa, since she was pretty much Ichigo's only friend at this time. No Tiny Chad nor Orihime in his life yet. He also ended up going on a handful dates with Haruko, getting to know each other better while having a great time. It also helped familiarize him with Karakura town as they went to a variety of attractions around town. It was a little difficult to maintain enough distance to not reveal that his form was fake. However, getting to experience something akin to a normal life for the first time in 4 years was extremely enjoyable, even if he couldn't be truthful about his situation. It was also his only source of entertainment in Karakura town. Unless you count people watching as entertainment, which he did not. He really wished he could get a human form though. Even if Vasto Lord wasn't completely human, it should be close enough to where he could use illusions to just cover up the differences rather than being entirely fake like he was now. He could hide any weird armor/carapace, wings and such as long as he had a humanoid shape and size. While walking around town, he would run into black cats from time to time, and each and every one of them made him nervous. He hoped he would be able to notice some kind of spiritual signature or energy emission from Yoruichi, but he wasn't willing to take a risk on that assumption. Anytime a black cat showed up, even with it being virtually impossible for Yoruichi to see through his illusions, he gave it a wide berth just to be sure. Why didn't she have any distinctive features in her cat form? Something like a nicely designed collar or a bow. Had also managed to locate Urahara's store a few days in and made sure to not get too close to it either, just in case that crazy bum did have some crazy way to detect him he couldn't even imagine. Though it was very unlikely, Urahara was one to invent crazy things for no good reason other than that he was interested in trying it after all. It was the 3rd day in a row where it was raining, and he was growing a little tired of watching Masaki and Ichigo so closely for an extended time. However, they were walking out in the rain when in the distance he could see the little expressionless girl, that damn Grand Fisher's lure. It was just by the riverbed. The river had already grown well beyond its usual bounds due to the non-stop downpour over the past few days, and the water was flowing rapidly and murky, obscuring Grand Fisher. Hisashi ran ahead of the pair and scanned the area with his spiritual senses. He noticed Grand Fisher was hiding in the shallows of the river very close to where his lure was. Hisashi crossed to the other side of the river and gently entered the river. Thankfully, the heavy rain and river flow covered up just about any little bit of noise he still made, which made it even easier to slip in unnoticed along with his invisibility. He slowly, but steadily swam up behind Grand Fisher, stalking it as it was stalking Masaki and Ichigo. He was ready to lure them closer for his final deadly strike, the one that would end up killing Masaki when she tried to save Ichigo. Hisashi was in position to strike the unsuspecting Grand Fisher, meanwhile focusing on his spiritual senses to know exactly what was going on around him outside of the water. Both to keep an eye on his 3 targets and any outside forces that might show up. He had to strike at just the right moment. Then it happened. Ichigo noticed the girl-like lure by the riverbank, and when it looked like she was about to fall into the river, he dashed away from his mother to try saving it. His mother panicked and ran after him. Just as he was about to get to the girl-like lure and made a grab for her to pull her away from the river, Grand Fisher started the final stage of his trap. He pulled the lure towards him in the water, causing Ichigo to lose his balance. Grand Fisher drew back his claws to strike. Masaki had noticed something was off about the girl and that she wasn't human. Masaki jumped towards Ichigo to save him. Chapter 27, Running for Your Life. While Grand Fisher was about to unleash his strike, Hisashi slowly drew his right blade arm back before it suddenly shot forward, piercing right through Grand Fisher's skull from behind and destroying his mask in one fell swoop. He didn't even get a chance to regret his life, unfortunately. A rather undeserved, merciful end for such a monster. Plus 2300 XP. XP, 31,650 out of 31,650. Plus 1 level. Plus 1 free status point. XP, 1,500 to 32,450. Mission completed. Skill transcribe granted. Transcribe. Based on Grand Fisher's ability to read the memories of someone whose body he is piercing and finding the face of their most loved one. Instead allows the user to read their memories and copy any memories, allowing them to learn their techniques. However, due to this being limited to memories, the user is only able to use techniques they can physically perform. For example, user can learn how a hollow spitting poison does so, but without a poison gland they wouldn't actually be able to perform the move. I guess all that training paid off after all. That was almost too easy, he thought to himself. If there was enough time he would have wanted to devour him for spirit power, but that wasn't enough though. He had to complete his performance. Immediately he changed his illusionary aura from making him invisible to an exact copy of Grand Fisher himself. He pounced out of the river looking like Grand Fisher, revealing himself to the two of them. Ichigo became terrified while Masaki panicked, knowing exactly what was coming for them. She did her best to cover Ichigo. Unfortunately, since she lost her Quincy powers, she was unable to protect them, and Grand Fisher Hisashi opened his mouth wide as he dove towards her figure and swallowed her whole, leaving only a terrified and wailing Ichigo on the riverbank. Before anyone troublesome could show up, he dove back into the river and switched back to being invisible. By now the remains of the real Grand Fisher had also already dissipated, and he swam down along with the river flow as fast as her could for the next few minutes, managing over 120 miles per hour with the help of the river's water flow. Masaki was kept in his mouth without swallowing her. At first she was so shocked she didn't even struggle, but once she regained her wits she started struggling fiercely, trying to escape his mouth. Unfortunately, she was only barely stronger than a regular human, having lost all of her special Quincy powers, leaving only her pure physical power, which for Quincy really wasn't much more than an in-shape human. It didn't take long for her to wear herself out fighting back against the pressure in his mouth, and her struggles began to die down. After a few minutes, about 10 miles downstream, Hisashi burst from the river's surface, unfurling his wings from underneath his carapace, which allowed him to travel much faster than he could swim. He burst out at 675 miles per hour, rushing away from Karakura. He couldn't maintain this speed for long, as it was akin to sprinting at top speed. However, the further he could get away the better, and he was worried Masaki would suffocate if she remained in his mouth for too long. He managed to get another 40 or so miles away in 10 about minutes before he landed in some kind of forested area away from any human infrastructure and quickly spat Masaki out. She immediately started gulping for air, and she was already significantly weakened because of the struggle and lack of oxygen. Well, that wasn't quite the way I thought I'd be eating a girl the first time in my second life, he chuckles internally, unconsciously trying to distract himself from the pain in the ass this was going to be. When she finally regains her breath and a modicum of strength, she quickly scrambles to her feet and backs away, keeping a tree towards her back for safety, unsure of what more she can do. She doesn't know where she is, she doesn't have any power, and most of all, why the hell is she still alive? Also, she knows that Hollow had swallowed her and spit her out, but for some reason she couldn't see him. He should be right there though, as he obviously spat her out. Did he leave while she was recovering? Everyone knows basic Hollow are primal beasts that just prey on anything with spirit power, the more the better. According to any logic, she should be dead the moment he caught her and she entered his mouth. Worse yet, she wasn't sure what happened to her son. Well, hello there. Did you catch your breath? He said awkwardly. She was dumbfounded. Though rare, some older basic Hollow would talk, but they never seemed to use this as a way to really communicate. They would use it to abuse, manipulate, and taunt their prey further. First off, your son is fine, so calm down, he said, trying to assure her of what was likely her greatest worry, even more so than her own safety probably was. Oh, right. I almost forgot to undo my camouflage. Let me change back. This must be quite uncomfortable, he said before she could even collect herself and answer. He suddenly appeared out of thin air, except she didn't recognize him because he looked like his normal self. She was surprised seeing this four-legged and two-armed bug looking hollow. Where's the hamster? She wondered. Where is the other one? She asked cautiously as she kept scanning the surroundings while faithfully keeping the tree covering her back from danger, fearing she would get attacked at any moment and that they were just playing with her. Oh, you mean this one? He asked while he transformed back into the appearance of Grand Fisher. Masaki blinked. This was too strange. It can transform and turn invisible? Is this really just a basic hollow? She asked herself. Shit, I seem like one of those mentally unstable villain types monologuing now, don't I? Well, let's try our best anyway, he thinks to himself. There was an awkward moment of silence as they were both stuck in thought and not sure how to move forward with this conversation. Masaki was utterly confused and Hisashi was trying to think of a good way to take care of this. Well, this is going to require quite a bit of explaining. I guess starting from the beginning chronologically is going to be best, he says. Chapter 28, Explaining Things. Remember this kid? He asks while transforming into the original 16-year-old version of himself before he died. He even included the exact clothing and gear he was wearing that night. How do you know about him? Her face twists into a pained expression. She had always felt guilty that someone died and she had been too late to save them. If only she had left right away. Even worse, it was a boy even younger than she was, just an innocent regular human. She can clearly remember the torn-up body of the kid that had bled out in that park. It had been sickening. She was at least glad when she believed he hadn't managed to turn into a hollow like she almost had due to White's poison. I don't just know about him. That was me, he replies bluntly. That's impossible. His soul was already gone when we got back there, she says, unable to accept that the person they failed to protect would have turned into a hollow. The words coming out of the familiar face was extremely off-putting. Did you really think they would leave my soul behind after it became involved in their experiments? He asked her while transforming back to his hollow appearance. Their experiments? She asked with hesitation. Ishin had told her there was more to it than just some kind of unusual hollow. Yeah, that hollow was an experiment by Soul Society's Captain Sosuke Aizen. After I was attacked by him and his associates took me away and made me into what I am now, he says. He suddenly unleashes blood venom, and an all-too-familiar pattern spreads across his carapace, shocking Masaki further. No way, that's blood venom. But only Quincy can use that. She isn't sure what to think. It should be absolutely impossible for a hollow to use that skill, even more so than other spiritual creatures, since Quincy's spirit power is poison to hollow and hollow spirit power is poison to Quincy. You're lying. You used that transformation or illusion power to do this, she says, trying to cover up the uncertainty and guilt in her heart. Hisashi sighs. This is such a pain. He turns, removes blood venom, then proceeds to slash one of his arms deeply. A lot of blood splashes on the ground. It doesn't take long for his high-speed regeneration to kick in and completely heal the wound though. Then he uses blood venom, again making sure to pump a lot of his spirit power into it, and slashes the other arm. This time it barely even manages to scratch him. Happy now? He asks. Or do you need to test it? If you want you can check the blood to make sure it's real. He backs up to give her the space in case if she wants to. Masaki shakes her head, but still hesitantly walks up to the puddle of blood, dipping her fingers in and rubs them together. If this is all faked, it's a very convincing fake, she thinks. However, she is starting to believe that Hisashi isn't just some regular hollow now. Alright, say I were to believe you. Then what happened to you? She asks. Well, the attack did turn me into a hollow and I was experimented on for over 10 years after I died there. As you've seen, I can become virtually undetectable. They weren't aware how that power had developed, and it gave me an opening to escape during one of the experiments on me, he says. Lying convincingly is a lot easier when you don't have a face. While I was imprisoned there, though, I did manage to hear some things regarding their plans. One of which involved the attack on you. Wait, you're the one that attacked me, she counters. Not quite. Look, he says, then transforms into Grand Fisher, including the lure. Then he started moving the lure away, but it disappeared as soon as it got to the edge of his illusory aura, just beyond his arm reach. That's the range of my ability. I wouldn't have been able to lure your son with this like the original Grand Fisher that drew him in and was poised to attack. I just knew he was going to attack you because it was planned. I killed him before he could complete the attack, then took his place to fake your death so you would survive without eyes and knowing, he explains. Your attack was part of their larger plan involving both the very top of Soul Society and Hueco Mundo. They have already taken over the leadership of Hueco Mundo, he reveals. Don't we need to warn them, she says, realizing the danger this represents. No. Your family, Urahara, and his associates and Soul Society are under close watch around the clock, and any move will force their hands, killing anyone involved to prevent the information from spreading. The only way is to strike at the right time. He slowly tries to lead her to seeing things the way he wants her to. It's difficult because he wants to use her savior complex and guilty feelings to move things in the direction he wants, but there is a risk that he trigger her savior complex too much and she ends up doing something that messes it all up for him. He is going to have to take drastic measures. Roughly 6 years from now, Aizen plans to betray Soul Society. That is a moment of weakness for him when he gives up the support of the Shinigami. Until he makes his move, they just see him as one of the nicest, most beloved captains in all of history. Before then, he can mobilize both the forces of Hueco Mundo and Soul Society to take care of things either in the open or from the dark, he tells her. As much as I would like to let you return to your family now that the attack is over, I can't have you showing up and alerting them that you survived and revealing my existence, in turn endangering my and my family's survival. Another thing is, I went out of my way to save you, but if you end up endangering my family, I won't hesitate to take drastic measure to protect them, he added threateningly. Masaki's blood ran cold with the sheer amount of killing intent he was giving off near the end of his sentence. She was sure he wouldn't hesitate to kill her on the spot if he decided she was a threat. Part of her could understand. She felt the same way when it came to her own family. Family, she stuttered out, still affected by his wave of killing intent. Well, I had a family before I died, he said matter-of-factly, as if it was the plainest thing in the world. Although she was starting to get rather convinced hollow and family were two concepts that had no overlap in her mind before this point, and she had thought he just acting out of self-interest. Technically, every hollow had a family before they died, but they were more likely to eat them rather than protect them. Hell, many of them did end up eating their families. There has to be enough carrot along with the stick. Hisashi thought to himself. In return, I will help protect your family for these 6 years. After that, you should be safe to return without risking retaliation from Aizen, and I'm even willing to reveal some information regarding what happened to the Quincy if that interests you, he adds. Masaki was struggling. She wanted to go back to her family. However, if it was a risk to them and others, if she did, that wasn't something she wanted to risk. Also, unlike Hisashi, even if she did return, she had no way of protecting them as she was now. She also knew something had happened since she lost all her powers. Chapter 29, Deal. Masaki nodded. It was better to go along with things until she finds out more, rather than do anything reckless for now. All right, but what am I supposed to do? She asked tentatively. Well, no offense, but I have to be able to keep an eye on you. You're a risk until I know I can trust you after all, he says bluntly, not hiding the truth from her. Oh, I don't mean literally. You just need to stay within my spiritual perception. If you leave, I will go after you and stop you. Currently, I can sense up to about 15 miles. As I get stronger, this should grow too, giving you more freedom. As it does, he clears up. Well, that could be worse, she guessed, thinking it wasn't as bad as some of her guesses were that involved some form of imprisonment. Though she guessed this might have more to do with his confidence in capturing her, a regular human, than any real benevolence on his part. As for what to do inside of that range, that's up to you, though I have something you could help me with. I don't think it's too much to ask with me saving you and keeping an eye on your family for you, he says. What do you want? She asks, unsure what she had to offer that a hollow could possibly be interested in. I need you to train my sister, he says. Train your sister? She almost stumbles with how confused she is. What am I supposed to train her in? Okay, so he has a sister. Does she need a tutor or something? She wondered. Due to my fault she became a foolbringer. Although it's not the same, there should be enough overlap in all the systems that rely on spirit power for you to be at least able to teach her some things of use in mastering her power. Also, you've received formal training in it, he tells her his speculation. He figured at the very worst she could at least teach her the intricacies of basic things like spirit power, particles, and pressure control. I would teach her myself, but as a hollow most of my powers are pretty much instinctual, so I'm not really a good fit to help her with her abilities. Meanwhile, you have 6 years to fill up, and in 6 years I will be heading to Hueco Mundo, so I want my sister to be able to protect herself by then so I can leave with fewer worries, he says. Oh, I forgot to mention we're also quite wealthy. You wouldn't have to worry about your living situation for the duration either if you agree, he finished. Now between their parents and Reina's income from the company, taking care of another person wouldn't even put a noticeable dent on their monthly income. Masaki decided that she would go along with Hisashi for now. This way she would also find out more about Hisashi, and meeting his sister should go a long way to proving his story and also give her some leverage in case she needs it. Also, if it did all turn out to be true, his offer seemed more than reasonable to her. She was saved, her family got protection, she would have a place to stay meanwhile and be taken care of, and all she had to do was teach someone some of her training. Alright, I'll believe you for now and agree, she said firmly. Great, so first thing. I would appreciate it if you didn't tell my sister about me being experimented upon. My death and eventual return were traumatic enough as is. She doesn't need to know. I just told her I was asleep during that time, he told her. Masaki nodded. Okay, I can do that, she easily agreed. Great. In that case we can go there now, he said while kneeling down and holding out his claws to carry her. She walked up and awkwardly climbed up in his claws. Well, that at least went better than some of my worst imagined outcomes, he though internally letting out a sigh of relief. He quickly covered them with illusory aura and flew them back to Naruki City. He had to go a little slower because she was now a weak regular human, and near 700 miles per hour winds are not something human flesh is made to withstand, and it also wasn't pleasant flying at those speeds anyway, since it felt like sprinting at your very fastest. Masaki already starts feeling a bit more reassured since he took her back to Naruki. Even if she had accepted his offer and gone along with him, he was still a hollow and she was going to be suspicious of him. They land just outside of his house, where he put down Masaki and transforms into the 23-year-old version of his old self. He had come to quite like this appearance in his time with Haruko. It was quite late at night now, so he tapped on Reina's window to wake her up. Reina woke up, and as soon as she recognized the sharp ticking sound, she was up already. She might not have heard it for about 2 months, but it was a very distinct tap due to his blades. She quickly rushed to get dressed and ran downstairs, then out the door. She saw his current human form. Is that you, Hisashi? She asked, a bit confused. It did look a lot like him, but until this point he had always appeared to her in his 16-year-old form. He nodded and undid his transformation, revealing his true self. As soon as he did, she ran and hugged him. Masaki was quite surprised, and even more so since she had been completely ignored until this point. Well, so far his story seems to be checking out, she thinks. Where were you? Are you okay? What did you do? She asked excitedly while hugging him. All right, slow down, he said with a chuckle. She finally let go and backed off a bit, then noticed the strange woman standing by him. She was quite the mature beauty, with a slim figure, fair skin, and long wavy light brown hair and brown eyes. She looked like an absolute mess though. Her makeup was smudged and her hair and clothing was slimy and dirty with who knows what. Okay, then who is this? She asked. Chapter 30, Introductions. This is Kurosaki Masaki. She's a friend I found that might be able to help you with your powers, he said with a wide smile. It didn't take Reina long to go from suspicious to excited at the thought of improving. And this is Saito Reina, my little sister also. Hisashi started saying. Could I borrow the shower or something first? I feel so gross. Masaki interrupted, a little impatient now that the worst of the shock and fear had worn off. Reina nodded in understanding. Of course, come in, she said, leading her inside to the bathroom. Hisashi was quickly left behind by the two women. He decided to do a quick hunt nearby since he had been out of town for quite some time now. Reina ended up grabbing some of her own clothes for Masaki as the ones she was wearing probably weren't salvageable. She ended up grabbing her a skirt, because most of her pants would probably be too long and fit awkwardly due to Masaki's short stature when compared to herself. Masaki just got out of the shower after changing into the new clothes, feeling refreshed and like a human again. Hisashi was still out patrolling, so Reina led Masaki to the living room, still quite confused and intrigued by this new person. They made sure to keep down since it was still the middle of the night and they didn't want to wake her parents. Thanks for that, Masaki said. Of course, Reina replied with a wide smile. Since she is training me and can see brother, obviously she should have some power, right? She thought. So, what can you do? She asked excitedly. Rather than the answer she expected, instead Masaki looked kind of uncomfortable and awkward. Nothing anymore, she answers with a slightly forced awkward smile. I'm sorry, Reina quickly answered, noticing she had stepped on a slightly sensitive topic. Masaki looked up and sighed before relaxing her shoulders. No, it's okay. I used to have powers, but lost them. Since I'll be teaching you, how about telling me a little about yourself, she said. Well, I'm 20 now. Before brother came back 2 years ago, things were pretty normal. We struggled for quite a few years after he was killed. Well, our parents still do at times, she says with a sigh. She wishes she could tell them, but she understood that unless they had a way for their parents to see her brother without having to gain high spirit power, or if they were capable of protecting them, if they did that, telling them wasn't smart, since they would probably just think she was being delusional due to grief or stress. They don't know? Masaki asked. No, they're still normal people, she said. So growing up I was spoiled a lot by mom and Hisashi. Pretty normal, really. At home I liked playing with Hisashi. He sometimes made games on his computer for us to play together. At the time I was doing quite well at school. Then Hisashi died. For a while it was difficult. I had trouble going to school. Sometimes I was just sad, other times angry. I lost quite a few of my friends and my grades dropped. I relied a lot on my mom to get through that time, or maybe we got through it together, I guess. She takes a deep breath and pauses for a few moments. Masaki struggles to hold back her own tears due to feeling she is partly to blame for what Reina and her family had gone through, but this wasn't her moment, so she pushed it down. Things slowly got better and my grades started picking up by middle school. I started making some new friends. Things were slowly returning to somewhat normal again. Then about a few years ago I was assaulted by some scum, but before they could do too much I was protected. I couldn't really make out what saved me though, and it was all blurry. She explained about how Hisashi returned. From then I noticed the same blur would show up near our house or follow me around at times. At first I was terrified, but as time went on I noticed it didn't mean any harm and even felt vaguely familiar. Over time he kept becoming clearer until I could recognize him well, as you've seen him, she said, not sure how to describe him. Masaki nodded, remaining silent to let her complete her story. This was useful information for her, and so far Hisashi's story was checking out to the extent she could verify from his sister at least. Although he became clear enough for me to recognize and even hear him, though he couldn't really talk back then, I acted like I couldn't see him. Then our house was attacked by 2 other hollow and he protected us. I ran after him afterwards and found out he could talk. That's how I found out that he was actually my brother. She has a gentle smile as she reminisces. Then he taught me how the operating system he had written before dying worked and how to update it. With his software as the base I updated it and found it as Shoni to release it. Wait, I know that name. My computer runs that. Wait, you said Hisashi originally made it? But he was only 16 at the time, she said, extremely surprised at this massive revelation. Reina chuckles. Well, like the name of the company, I like to think we made it together, but the core of the operating system was indeed completely made by him over 14 years ago, she answered. Masaki could tell how proud she was of both her brother, herself, and what they were able to accomplish just from the look on her face. I dropped out of college and worked full-time on the company. Not long after the company became a big success, I was kidnapped. Brother did come to save me, but before he did, I awoke my powers. Then he left 2 months ago and came back with you. Reina finished. Well, that was long, but covered anything important. What about you? She asked. Masaki was happy to find out that it sounded like Hisashi was telling the truth and was really the kid from back then. That would be the only way for him to be able to explain the program he wrote himself to her, so he couldn't be tricking her. She still wasn't sure how much to say about herself, though. I grew up in a special family that is full of people with special powers and was trained to fight Hollow. Then I was attacked by a Hollow and he saved me. Then as thanks I agreed to help him by training you, she said, giving a very simplified version of the events for now, not comfortable sharing much about her own life yet. Chapter 31, Training. Masaki started training Reina and almost 2 years had passed. She actually took it very seriously and had time scheduled out for physical and spiritual training along with time for explanations along with meal plan. She made it work around Reina's work schedule, which gave her plenty of time to herself. At first Masaki stayed with Reina and her parents, with the excuse that she was an online friend that moved and needed some help getting started in Naruki City. However, thankfully Reina was making enough money from the company she founded to buy an apartment building for the two of them to live in, not too far from the office and still close to their parents, so she could visit whenever she wanted. She just rented out the extra apartments to cover the maintenance cost for the building. This wasn't great as it gave her lots of time to think, worry, and mull things over. Spending a lot of time thinking about her family and worrying about their safety. At first she bottled this up, but eventually Reina noticed something was off, and when she wasn't opening up to her about it, she ended up asking Hisashi to talk with her about it. He ended up giving her information about how her family was doing, making sure that every time he went to check up on them he would stick around for a little bit to get some idea about what their situation was. This helped a little with Masaki, as getting a more in-depth explanation of the situation of her family and how her kids were doing made her feel a little bit better. Afterwards, Masaki's relationship with Reina and Hisashi started improving more. She started growing a lot closer with Reina. Between spending a lot of time together for training and Reina having a warm personality, it wasn't hard to like her. It took her longer to warm up to Hisashi, even though he was the one who saved her. A youth that has been raised to hate and hunt Hollow wasn't so easy to overcome. Eventually, though, through Reina she slowly started becoming more comfortable with Hisashi. Over the months she also noticed that she seemed to be recovering some of her strength, which she was extremely curious about, but she hadn't told Hisashi nor Reina yet. She was beginning to trust them, and she hoped Hisashi trusted her enough to be fine with that, but she wasn't going to take that risk yet. Whenever Hisashi would visit Karakura town to check in on the Kurosaki family, he also made sure to spend some time with Hueco. She had been worried when he suddenly disappeared for over a week without saying anything after the kidnapping happened. He managed to reassure her he was okay, but was sad to find out he wouldn't be in town as much anymore. Hisashi was still fully focused on clearing Naruki City and its surroundings of hollow and animal souls, and would take care of any of the outright potential threats to the Kurosaki family anytime he checked on them, though he was careful and tried to make sure he didn't take care of enough to draw undue attention. Reina was focused on growing her business, which had branched out enough now to be solidly considered an international business. Her team was growing rapidly, freeing her up from most of the actual programming and development work towards a position where she mostly just needed to manage the direction of the development and have the employees figure out the implementation. Unfortunately, their father still continued to work despite Reina being more than willing to help out with the finances so he could retire and spend more time with them. He was probably feeling uncomfortable with the idea of not being the provider for the household, so Reina dropped it for now, hoping that they would be able to slowly change his mind. Meanwhile, she spent any free time exploring her powers through training. Due to the physical training, she had managed to grow the amount of power she was able to handle, and with the help of Masaki's explanations and training she managed to create a very basic version of Bringer Light. Since her base physical ability and the amplification weren't that great yet, she still had a long way to go, but the first step is often the hardest. Hisashi was also happy to see the Kurosaki family seem to be developing towards the way they were in the original, with Ichigo becoming more withdrawn and Karen distancing herself. Ichigo had also met Chad now. He wasn't happy that they were suffering, but this needed to happen for things to follow the original timeline for now while he was biding his time. Plus 2 year. Plus 109500 XP from Hollow. Plus 91200 XP from Animal Spirits. Plus 4500 XP from Pluses or Humans. Plus 32844 Spirit Power from Hollow. Plus 90 Spirit Power from Pluses or Humans. Plus 730 Spirit Power from Passive Absorption. Plus 16 levels. Plus 16 stat points. Status panel. Name, Saito Hisashi. Soul age, 52 to 54. Race, Hollow. Rank, Hollow. Level, 80 to 96. XP, 3,710 out of 56,610. Stats. Strength, 35 to 40. Dexterity, 45 to 50. Constitution, 15 to 16. Intelligence, 20 to 25. Spirit Power, 19,194 to 52,858. Available stat points, 0. Passive skills. Spiritual energy absorption. High-speed regeneration. Acidic touch. Active skills. Soul-body separation. Spirit power concealment. Illusory aura. Blut. Energy blade. Transcribe. He had kept on track mostly with his growth, still heavily investing in dexterity and strength with a little sprinkled into the rest. His spirit power had managed to almost double, which was very satisfying. He could now sustain his illusory aura with spirit power concealment and heavy use of blut, while still being able to send out energy blades during a fight without being drained in just a few moments. He did manage to use transcribe, though unless a hollow happened to have a similar body to himself, the knowledge and skills he could gain from them were of little to no use. As for using it on humans, he didn't feel comfortable harming someone to use it, and most of those he was comfortable harming didn't have too many skills worth stealing. Chapter 32, Growth. Masaki didn't have too many responsibilities outside of handling Reina's training regiment and teaching her, so she decided to take over the management of the apartment building. She already had the customer service and management experience from the Kurosaki clinic. She might as well put them to good use and keep herself busy. She originally wanted to do it for free since her housing and living expenses were completely covered, but Reina wouldn't hear it and forced her to take a cut of the income as payment. She could eventually only reluctantly agree. Managing the apartment complex also helped her keep her mind occupied, which was good, because it was becoming harder and harder to not see her family for so long, even if she was well updated on how their lives were going. Just 2 more years, she kept reminding herself. Reina had already gotten beyond the basics of Bringer Light and wasn't only able to jump higher and move faster now, but was even able to use it to stand on water or on the air. Her physique had also improved, allowing her to maintain her Bringer Light and Scepter for longer. Masaki had also been drilling combat strategy into her head, focused on the way her skills worked. As for their company Ashoni and its operating system, they had just managed to surpass Windows in consumer base, making them the most popular operating system for consumers, and businesses weren't far behind. The development team had grown so large and was now managed well enough to where she could completely focus on the CEO duties and guiding the company. A good secretary also helped organize everything for her better, leaving her more time to train. If she kept up with streamlining the company and development, it wouldn't be much longer before she could step down as CEO and simply remain as the owner, only stepping in at times where things were moving in a wrong direction. Due to how advanced and complete the operating system was in the beginning, they had opted not to go public or look for outside financing, meaning she will still the solitary owner 6 years later. There was more good news in that they were finally about to convince their father to retire now that he was nearly 60, freeing him up to spend time with his wife and daughter. It took him a while, but eventually he was able to start enjoying his time without having to feel responsible. Their retirement funds were set and his daughter was the CEO of a highly successful company, so he had almost nothing to worry about anymore. Their mom was happy, nothing too much had changed for her. However, the lives of the two most important people to her were going well, which was enough for her to be happy. Being able to spend more time with her husband and daughter was just another perk. Recently, Masaki had even started regaining access to her former powers, for the most part allowing her to use blood venin for her defense and her high-leg bogan that allowed her to fire her spiritual arrow again. This had her very excited, as she had felt lost ever since she lost her powers. She had been trained on them for as long as she could remember, and not having them felt like a piece of her was missing. They might not have come back to the way it used to be yet, but she was at least able to fight back again, weak hollow again, which was already more than she had dared to hope for. At the same time, though, there was a slightly uncomfortable feeling that grew stronger while she was using her powers. As if it was becoming difficult to control the powers the way she used to, which had never happened to her before. She hadn't brought this up to Reina and Hisashi yet, as she was worried about what it might be. Plus 2 year. Plus 113250 XP from Hollow. Plus 97400 XP from Animal Spirits. Plus 4200 XP from Pluses or Humans. Plus 30290 Spirit Power from Hollow. Plus 80 Spirit Power from Pluses or Humans. Plus 730 Spirit Power from Passive Absorption. Plus 12 levels. Plus 12 stat points. Status panel. Name, Saito Hisashi. Soul age, 54 to 56. Race, Hollow. Rank, Hollow. Level, 96 to 108. XP, 3,710 out of 56,610. Stats. Strength, 40 to 40. Dexterity, 50 to 55. Constitution, 16 to 18. Intelligence, 25 to 30. Spirit Power, 52,858 out of 87,710. Available stat points, 0. Equals passive skills, equals. Spiritual energy absorption. High-speed regeneration. Acidic touch. Equals active skills, equals. Soul-body separation. Spirit power concealment. Illusory aura. Blut. Energy blade. Transcribe. Hisashi had managed to break through to the point where he assumed his combat effectiveness was probably either almost at or just at the bare minimum to fight a lieutenant, and would be able to match most Jillian despite not having become one yet. It should be easy to gobble up a lot of Jillian as soon as he transformed. His skills were making up for a lot of the difference, as Blood Boosted was able to boost his offense and defense a lot using his spirit power to supercharge them, and Energy Blade gave him the ability to fire off large blasts of energy, which he didn't really have access to before he got it. He really felt bad about Transcribe, though, as he felt it was a skill with great potential, but there wasn't all that much to be gained from the memories of basic hollow or regular human criminals, and those were his only available targets right now. He couldn't wait to fight some higher-ranked hollows such as Ajuchas and above, where they gain consciousness and might actually have some memories of good skills they practiced. As for Shinigami, it's still best not to mess with them. Unlike Hollow, they are too coordinated, and fighting one even if he doesn't kill them is like kicking an ant's nest. He also isn't sure if he can use things reliant on Shinigami spirit power with his Hollow spirit power if it isn't provided and modified by his system. Otherwise, using it to learn various Kido techniques would be amazing. Chapter 33, Control. Hisashi was fighting some kind of bird-like hollow. He was chasing it in the sky when suddenly he heard an alert he hadn't heard in years. By now, with the growing strength of Reina and Masaki's help, most situations they could solve themselves, so the system didn't bother to send him missions. Great for his peace of mind, not so great for his list of available skills. Emergency mission, save Masaki and protect Naruki City. What? How are those even related? What the hell are the two of them doing, he questions to himself. He stabs the bird hollow with both blades before separating them, bisecting the hollow to quickly end and devour it before paying closer attention to Masaki's spiritual signature and finds it fluctuating wildly, swinging between regular human levels and even peak hollow levels. It also seems to have a familiar quality to it that he can't quite put his finger on. What the hell is going on with her? Are they in danger? He worries. He rushes to find her with Reina during one of their training sessions, but her eyes are turning black. Meanwhile, a strange bone-like material with a blue vein pattern looks like it is trying to eat her. Masaki lets out a scream that seems to be somewhere between a human scream and a high-pitched hollow roar. She looks in pain and like she is losing control. Shit! Isn't this a lot like Ichigo losing control of his hollow self during becoming a Vizard? He yells internally. He glances over at Reina, who is trembling in fear, but also seems to be worried for Masaki. What's happening with her? She asks. There's no time to explain. Hisashi yells at her. His wings unfurl and he dashes at her with high speed, biting down on her and flying them as far from civilization as possible before dropping her to the ground in the middle of nowhere. If he had left her in Naruki City, there is no saying how much damage she could do with the amount of spirit power she is releasing it from one moment to the next. Reina blinked in confusion as both of them disappeared faster than she was able to see, leaving her all alone and worried. Masaki was trashing wildly on the ground, roaring out over and over as more and more of her is consumed by the weird bone growth. Her incisors started growing, giving her a more feral appearance, only complemented by the monstrous roars coming out of the mouth. They don't sound like something that should be able to come from a human. She finally seems to calm down a little, getting up on her feet before she suddenly raises her head, looking up at him. Her eyes have turned completely black with a glowing orange iris that seems to lack any of the kindness Masaki's eyes are usually filled with. The bone-like growth with the blue veins has formed a kind of bone-like armor all over her body except her face. She points at him, which confuses him. Upon close inspection on the bone bracer, there seem to be some kind of protruding ports on top of and below her wrist. Then he feels the spirit particles gathering and a stream of black and purple spirit power bursts from both ports, forming a sinister-looking version of her, Heilig Bogen, Holy Bow in German, just in front of the bow, and her pointing finger. A similarly colored sphere of spirit power gathers with a dark and menacing spirit pressure exuding from it. Is that a fucking Zero? He worries as it looks an awful lot like a Zero, just smaller, thankfully. She draws the energy bow, causing the spirit power sphere to stretch into an arrow that she fires as soon as it forms. Hisashi manages to dodge it due to the distance. It was scarily accurate and fast for such a powerful move. Even more so considering what her power level had been before the transformation. Back then there was not even a chance of her being a danger to him before. She wouldn't even be able to scratch him. So far it seemed like she still wasn't a huge threat to him now. However, if she did manage to hit him just right with this move, it could get dangerous. That arrow was no joke. The only thing I can do is restrict her to this area in order to keep the damage minimal and hope, given enough time and a beating, she manages to regain control. Or if all else fails and she doesn't regain control, put her out of her misery, he decides. Suddenly she disappears from her spot and appears just in front of him using some form of Harenkyaku, with another shot charged, looking to blast him at close range. He is ready though and manages to slam her back down into the ground using the flat of his blade before landing near her. Masaki! It's me, Hisashi! You have to defeat it and regain control, he yells at her. Rather than getting any kind of response though, now she is moving around in the air, leaving behind afterimages as she rains arrows down on him from above in all directions. He makes the most of his dexterity and manages to dodge each of the arrows by a hair's breadth, like dancing in a rain of arrows. Before she manages to unleash another move, he flashes behind her and uses the flat of his blade again to knock her down in hopes of slapping some sense back into her. She crashes through a bunch of trees, leading a path through the forest. Masaki, think of your family. If you don't control it, they will lose their mom. You will never get to see them again, he yells. This time seems to be slightly more successful, as even after getting up she stumbles for a bit and grabs her head. It doesn't last long though, as she shakes her head and unleashes another roar. Chapter 34, Submission. Masaki's bow started growing slimmer. Unfortunately, this wasn't an indication of it losing power. Rather, it seemed as if the bow was being refined to its intended form, being more concentrated and less wild than it was before. The same seemed to be the case for her armor, which seemed to be refining its shape, and the blood vein-like markings became brighter. In a way, this was probably a good thing, indicating she was gaining control and not acting like a completely wild beast. However, it also meant she became more dangerous until she did regain control. She unleashed another volley of arrow. The power was still about the same, however the speed was increased by quite a bit. He was still dodging them nimbly, but his large stature wasn't optimal for this, and multiple started grazing and digging trenches through his skin despite running, blood vein, himself. Thankfully this wasn't anything high-speed regeneration couldn't keep up with, and the cuts were healing at a visible pace. He pushed in towards her in spite of the volley of arrows and managed to land a kick on her face that sent her spinning backwards. "Sorry, but you need a wake-up call," he though, feeling bad about kicking her in the face. It's a little different than doing the same to a hollow or a guy. This blow seemed to shake her further as she was struggling to get back up. "Think about Ichigo. What about Karen and Yuzu? They're all waiting for you. Are you going to just abandon them?" He tried to remind her of her family again, since that was the only thing that showed any effect so far. She was still fighting, but he noticed there was a pained expression on her face, unlike the crazy unhinged one she was sporting until this point. While the hollow side was forward flip and kicked the back of her head, forcing her into the ground before mounting her from behind and stabbing his arm blades into the ground across her neck. He fiercely head-butted her to try to beat the last struggle out of her. "Masaki, I know you're better than this. You aren't a failure of a mom. Your kids need you," he says. He keeps her pinned to the ground with both the arm blades across her neck, somewhat keeping her restrained despite cutting into her neck. He managed to use his remaining limbs to pin all four of hers. She slowly calmed down. He noticed the armor slowly receding, and she eventually passed out. Paying attention to her spiritual pressure, it calmed down and lowered again, though it was still a lot higher than it was before the whole ordeal. It was then that he sensed something in the distance. Immediately he used his illusory aura to cover both of them, making it look like there was no one there while making sure he remained completely still. A pair of Shinigami had showed up in the distance. They had received some unusual readings in the area and were sent to investigate. It wasn't hard to determine something had happened here. There were trenches and craters all over the place. In a forest like this, such traces get covered relatively quickly, so they were definitely fresh. Unfortunately, the massive readings that were found before were gone, and even with their measurement instruments they weren't able to determine where it went. They eventually made their report through their Hell Butterfly to let them know about the traces they found at the source, but also that they were unable to locate the cause. They ended up giving the area one more survey before leaving. They didn't have the luxury of time while they were on Earth. Leisure time was something they only had back in Soul Society. Hisashi didn't take the unconscious Masaki back to Naruki City or any other populated place, because he had no clue whether she would be in control when she woke up or would go right back to rampaging. Masaki woke up feeling quite groggy, and it took her a few moments to recall what happened before she lost consciousness, and it was all rather blurry while she wasn't in control, all of her focus being on her fighting the hollow inside her. I am so sorry," she says. She feels incredibly guilty because she knows if it wasn't for Hisashi's actions she would have ended up killing a lot of people, something that absolutely horrifies her. Not only that, she would likely have been put down like a cur dog by Soul Society or used by unscrupulous people. She shivers just thinking about the possibilities. "Alright, no need to think too much about it. We can't leave until we are sure you have truly mastered your hollow side though, and the only way to know that for sure is to transform into your half-hollow form without losing control," he tells her. She nods nervously, still insecure about managing the transformation, but she knows she doesn't have a choice. "Still, thanks for dragging me back," she says, her eyes showing a gratefulness that hadn't been there before, even though he had saved her before. At first they notice now her Quincy powers have returned completely, even when she isn't in her hollowified form. The first time she tries to will herself to transform, it doesn't take her long to lose control, needing Hisashi to knock her unconscious again. Although it takes quite a few tries and Hisashi knocking sense into her, she finally manages to maintain control while transformed after a few days of continuous attempts. She may not be quite at the level of the Visored, but they were transformed from lieutenants and captains. Meanwhile, she was mostly a regular human before she gained her transformation, he thought to himself. Although the situation had been dangerous, he could also see the potential for this, as it would mean she could protect herself and was more than powerful enough to protect Reina too. It also seems that we might have made a breakthrough in her trust too. Before this, she still had some wariness around me that she didn't have with Reina even after all these years. He smiled at Masaki. Okay, let's head back. You should be fine now, he tells her. When they get back, Reina runs and hugs both of them, having been worried sick over the past few days that either one or both of them might have died. What happened? Are you okay now, Masaki? Reina asks her worriedly. Masaki smiled at her, knowing Reina cared about her a lot. They had grown very close after spending these years living and training together. I'm fine now thanks to Hisashi. Not only that, I'm stronger than ever, she says to reassure her. Chapter 35, Preparations. Mission completed. Skill Hachijio Sogai granted. Hachijio Sogai. A twofold dislocation barrier that erases whatever is within it from existence and removes the space it takes up from an outsider's inner consciousness, making it so one cannot even perceive its presence. The very thought of getting close to it does not even occur to those outside it. Well, that should be helpful. Although I can almost perfectly conceal myself, I'm not able to do that for anything else outside my range, he thinks, seeing the power he got. It might not directly increase his strength, but it should still be useful both for hiding any place he was staying and also other people from potential enemies. Masaki started training her powers with Reina now that she was comfortable sharing this with Hisashi. With both their growth, Hisashi was feeling much more comfortable about traveling to Hueco Mundo, since both of them should be able to defend themselves and Masaki should be able to return to her family shortly after. Masaki had managed to adjust to her new powers. Hisashi had ended up naming the Quincy Hollow Hybrid Nichtig, German for empty/void, based on the Quincy habit for using German themes and language for just about everything. She had also gotten back to manufacturing Jinto for spells now that her powers were back to prepare for the battles she knew were coming from Hisashi. No matter what, she was going to be ready to defend her family herself when the time came instead of having to rely on others. Reina's company had really taken off and she had finally promoted a CEO to take over for her and only needed to regularly attend board meetings to keep track of the company's progress and roadmaps without needing to be present on a daily basis anymore. They had established themselves firmly and there wasn't even a competitor that was coming close to competing with their product yet. Meanwhile, Hisashi had told Reina about the concept of the smartphone with touchscreen displays, knowing that this was going to be the next big thing after the cell phones that were currently all the rage, and he knew the PC market would shrink due to the growth of the mobile market once smartphones took off. He also already knew exactly what a successful smartphone looked and functioned like, meaning all her team had to do was figure out the execution and integration with their existing PC platforms. Though Hisashi was confident in pulling off traveling to Hueco Mundo and surviving there, he was still extremely satisfied that he had managed to get Reina into a position both financially and safety-wise where she should be able to take care of herself and the family regardless of what ended up happening to him after leaving. His father had loosened up and was now firmly enjoying his retirement with their mom, even planning to visit some places internationally that they had never had a chance to before due to his work responsibilities. Places like London, Paris, and New York. The time and attention was really rekindling the lost romance for their parents. At the end, he was also paying attention to Ichigo, who had just unlocked his Shinigami powers and was running around with Rukia hunting Hollow, not even knowing the machinations going on in the background. Plus 2 years. Plus 110560 XP from Hollow. Plus 92300 XP from Animal Spirits. Plus 4450 XP from pluses or humans. Plus 30290 Spirit Power from Hollow. Plus 70 Spirit Power from pluses or humans. Plus 669 Spirit Power from passive absorption. Plus 9 levels. Plus 9 stat points. Status panel. Name, Saito Hisashi. Soul age, 56 to 58. Race, Hollow. Rank, Hollow. Level, 108 to 117. XP, 12,730 out of 78,080. Equals stats, equals. Strength, 40 to 42. Dexterity, 55 to 60. Constitution, 18 to 20. Intelligence, 30. Spirit power, 87,710 to 118,739. Available stat points, 0. Passive skills. Spiritual energy absorption. High-speed regeneration. Acidic touch. Active skills. Soul-body separation. Spirit power concealment. Illusory aura. Blut. Energy blade. Transcribe. Hachijio Sogai. His growth speed had gotten to near a standstill from his experience, as he was only growing a level once every few months now, so most of his growth ended coming from his increasing combat senses through non-stop hunting hollow and combat training with Reina and Masaki. His proficiency is his skill also managed to grow as he kept practicing them, even using Hachijio Sogai to hide Reina and Masaki's training as it grew more and more intense. He had now gotten to the level where he should be able to fight toe-to-toe with your average lieutenant, and although he didn't know exactly what would happen when he transformed, but he guessed he would have surpassed the lieutenants and either be at or close to some of the weaker captains once he transformed into a Jillian in combat strength. He felt comfortable having gotten to the point he was and ready for what was coming over the next few months. At least as ready as he could hope to be, with the risk of getting caught up with people who had been training and planning for centuries with his decade of training. Ichigo might have had the power of plot armor, but he had the system on his side. Reina, I'll have to leave again for a while. I can't say for sure how long it will be, but it will at least be a few months unless some kind of emergency happens. Make sure to take care of Mom and Dad, he tells her during his farewell. She nods, though sad. She puts on a strong expression and hugs him tightly. Be careful, brother, and make sure to come back soon, she responds. Can you give me a moment with Masaki? He asks her. Okay, bye brother, she tells him before heading back inside. Masaki seems a little nervous, standing there and waiting for what he wanted to say to her. Masaki, I'll be keeping an eye on your family for the next 1 to 2 months, after which I'll be heading straight to Hueco Mundo. I just wanted to say thanks, and after the 2 months passes you should be able to go back to your family. Aizen's plan should already be in motion at that point, and both his focus should be elsewhere, and he shouldn't be able to just switch up his plans anymore, he explained. Once this is the case, you can tell Isshin, Kisuke, and the others what we talked about. Once Aizen betrays Soul Society, he is going to be building an army in Hueco Mundo to attack them, and the more they prepare the better, he ends with. And lastly, stay safe. Masaki felt bad as she hadn't trusted him for the longest time. She didn't really start trusting him until he helped her when her hollow side took over and brought her back despite the risk it brought him. She nodded. You too, and thanks for everything, she said, holding back her emotions to send him off confidently. Chapter 36, Target. A Sankamen appeared and opened its doors, revealing 2 Shinigami, a rough-looking red-haired guy with unique eyebrows and a refined black-haired pretty boy walking out. The rough-looking guy flipped down a set of goggles and started scanning the surroundings. I found some traces, Captain Kuchiki, he says to the pretty boy, who barely nods and remains silent. Hisashi was camouflaged on a nearby building roof looking down at them. He had noticed the fluctuations from Sankamen portal forming. Gotcha! Hisashi thought, spying on their arrival to Earth. He had been keeping an eye on the area along with the Ichigo and Rukia duo for the past few weeks, waiting for these two to appear. Ichigo had driven off the Jillian just the other day, so he knew it was close. He managed to take advantage and hunt a bunch of hollow covertly during the outbreak, but made sure to stay on the sidelines during the grand event. Hisashi stalked the two as they scouted around town until they got to the Kurosaki clinic, with Rukia running away. Kuchiki, Rukia, we've found you, the rough-looking one said with a smirk. After chasing her for a while unnoticed, the rough-looking one yelled at her from atop a power line pole. He lunges towards her, almost slicing her in two head to toe with his Zanpakuto and crushing the pavement. She barely manages to back away in time. We've been following you the whole time and you were so caught up in your thoughts that you didn't even notice us until I called out your name. Granted you're stuck in a jigai, but haven't you become a bit too lax? He asks her arrogantly. Jigai. An artificially created physical body that can be possessed by spiritual beings to interact with regular humans. Renji, she says, not knowing what to say. Answer me, Rukia. Where is the human that took your powers? He questions her. What are you talking about? Just because I'm in a jigai doesn't mean I've lost my powers. Also, how can you say it was a human? She denies. It was a human. Otherwise, how come you are behaving so human? He answers confidently. Rukia backs away, her eyes wide in shock. We grew up in the same place. You were adopted by the esteemed Kuchiki family. Right? You're Kuchiki, Rukia. You shouldn't be looking so human, he practically growls at her in indignation. Right, Captain Kuchiki, he asks, looking behind her. Rukia turns around slowly in fear of what she will find, only to see the refined pretty boy. Brother, Byakuya, she barely manages to say. Rukia. Byakuya says unemotionally. Before he says more, Renji dashes towards Rukia and attempts to slash her again, barely nicking her cheek, causing it to bleed. Passing Shinigami powers to a human is a serious crime. Renji reminds her. Now tell us where he is, he demands from Rukia. We'll take you back and kill him, he finishes while preparing to strike again. Rukia backs away from him slowly. He slashes at her diagonally, which she dodges by jumping over it. She only manages to dodge his follow-up strike by rolling back on the ground, though, before jumping back up on her feet. She's already running out of strength, though, and stumbles to her knees. Renji walks up to her to finish her, but is interrupted by a spirit arrow he has to dodge at the last second. A black-haired, bespectacled guy, sharp eyes and bandaged hands, carrying a shopping bag, walks into the light of a street lamp. Two armed men attacking a girl. How unpleasant, he said as he walked up to them. You can see us? Just who are you? Renji demands of him. Just a classmate. The guy in glasses answered him nonchalantly while pushing up his glasses. One who hates Shinigami, he completed the sentence. Why are you here? Rukia got up and asked him. Just a coincidence, don't worry about it, he told her. It's not like I sensed Shinigami and came to take a look with this shopping bag as an excuse, he said. Renji slashed the shopping bag to pieces. I asked you who you were, he said, being annoyed at being ignored. Well, don't answer if you don't want to. I'll just kill you, he said, pointing his Zanpakuto at Yuryu. Wait, he has nothing to do with this, said Rukia, and quickly rushed in front of the guy with glasses to protect him. Didn't I just say I'm her classmate that hates Shinigami? The guy with glasses answered just as arrogantly as Renji had been. That's not an answer. Renji yelled back at him. Ishida Yuryu. Pleased to meet you, he said calmly. What's with this attitude? Renji asked. You'd still want to know your killer's name, wouldn't you? Yuryu said. Renji's hand started shaking in anger, a slightly deranged smile appearing on his face. I've decided. I'm going to kill you, he said. Yuryu manages to fire off a few more spirit arrow, which Renji blocks one by one using his Zanpakuto while slowly closing in on him. After a few moments he manages to get in range and stabs Yuryu in the stomach. Yuryu collapses on the ground as he bleeds out of the stomach wound, struggling to get back up. Renji Abarai, that's the name of the man who killed you, he told Yuryu, looking down on him before slashing his Zanpakuto down. Wait! Rukia screamed. Suddenly a giant sword slashes between the two, blocking Renji's strike and splitting the pavement, leaving him no option but to jump back away from a Shinigami with bright orange spiky hair and the biggest Zanpakuto he has seen. Which squad are you from? W. Watts with that big-ass Zanpakuto, he questioned the newcomer. Well, Ichigo finally made it here. Just in time, as is his style. Hisashi thought to himself as he watched the fight happen. Oh? So it's big after all. I did think it was big compared to Rukia's. Ichigo said. The size reflects the Shinigami's spirit power. Renji revealed to him while thinking about what this means. Suddenly his eyes widen in realization. I see. You're the one that stole Rukia's powers. He jumps at him, slashing like a madman, which Ichigo repeatedly blocks. What's the matter? Is that big sword just for show? He taunts him. Ichigo finally takes a wide swing at Renji, however Renji jumps past the blade and with a spin slashes him from behind on his shoulder, incapacitating him. Rukia wants to run towards him, but is stopped by Yuryu, who is struggling to grab her ankle. It's over. You'll die and Rukia will get her powers back. Then we're taking her back to Soul Society where she will die. Renji says. You're such an idiot, she ran away all the way here so you wouldn't be involved, but you just had to come after her. Did you think you could do something? You, an accidental Shinigami? You can't even scratch a real Shinigami like us, he mocks Ichigo. Chapter 37, Taken. Ichigo gets up and slashes Renji across the chin, just barely scratching him. I know you were talking, but you were so wide open. I couldn't help it, but why don't you continue? You were talking about not even being able to scratch you? Ichigo said. You were off guard, Renji, the silent Byakuya suddenly chimes in. Captain Kuchiki? Renji asks. That kid looks familiar. There was a report the other day. He managed to seriously injure a Minos Grande and force it back to Hueco Mundo. Renji laughs out loud. This kid beat back a Minos Grande? Who'd believe that, he questions. I mean, just look at his Zanpakuto. It's so big and useless. It's obvious he hasn't mastered his spirit power, he says with a sneer. Do you even know your Zanpakuto's name? He asks Ichigo. Name? Do you name all your swords? He asks. He doesn't even know his Zanpakuto's name. And you believe you can fight me? You're 2,000 years too early. Renji says. Howl, Zabimaru. Renji yells as he runs his hand across the blade, transforming it into a straight sword with metal teeth running along the back. He swings the transformed blade down on Ichigo, but halfway into his swing it splits into segments, becoming a sword whip instead, which passed by Ichigo's Zanpakuto and pierces into his shoulder, causing him to drop the Zanpakuto. Slowly Renji tears his Zanpakuto out one tooth at a time, nearly tearing off Ichigo's arm. Ichigo falls to his knees holding his immobile arm, bleeding profusely. It's over, brat. It's time to get going. Renji yells. Renji dashes towards Ichigo to give him the finishing blow. Meanwhile, Rukia breaks out of her stupor and dashes towards them, leaping onto Renji's back while grabbing his arm holding the Zanpakuto. Run, Ichigo, she screams at him. Ichigo picks his Zanpakuto back up instead though. Oh, you can still move? Renji asks him while still struggling against Rukia. He finally manages to shake off Rukia. Well, struggle and die, he says with excitement. Suddenly the spirit power starts gathering around the barely conscious Ichigo, forcing Renji to take a step back from the spirit pressure. Ichigo suddenly looks up at him, his eyes barely conscious, before leaping at Renji and slashing him across the shoulder before turning around and dashing at him again before Renji can even react. Ichigo sends another upward slash at him, which he barely manages to dodge as it grazes his forehead, splitting his sensory goggles in two down the middle. Ichigo got his shonen power up and started swinging wildly at Renji, forcing him into a corner without being able to respond aside from dodging and parrying his furious blows. Finally falls to his knees and Ichigo leaps in for the final blow. Even expecting what was coming, Hisashi with his improved dexterity and intelligence could only barely see Byakuya moving towards Ichigo, breaking the blade off his Zanpakuto and returning to his previous spot, blade in hand. The others hadn't even noticed it yet. Ichigo finally realized that something broke his blade, turning to look at Byakuya only to notice his blade in Byakuya's hands. Byakuya drops Ichigo's blade and puts his hand on his sword. Before Ichigo even notices, he has already approached him and stabbed him twice. Hisashi was making sure to pay close attention to every move Byakuya made, as it would be invaluable to see his ho-ho and swordsmanship for when he gets a humanoid form himself again down the line, and analyzing it with his current intelligence was very much possible. Renji and Rukia are in shock, also only barely realizing what happened. What's the matter, Renji? Byakuya asked him. And nothing. You didn't need to step in, Captain. Renji answers in embarrassment. If I just watched, I get rusty. Byakuya answers nonchalantly. Ichigo! Rukia screams, running towards him. On her way, she is blocked by Renji though. Let go, Renji, she shouts at him. Look, the kid's dead. Interfering now will only extend your sentence, he shouts back at her. It's my fault he died. So what's wrong in following him? She yells at him in pain. You can't stay away from him? Byakuya asks her. Brother. Rukia said, unable to give him an answer. He looks a lot like him. Byakuya tells her. Ichigo grabs the hem of Byakuya's pants. I'm not dead yet, he struggles. Rukia, realizing that if he keeps struggling against her brother it will be his death, runs up to them and kicks Ichigo's hand away. What are you doing, Rukia? Ichigo asks her indignantly. You're just a human. How dare you grab brother like that? Know your place, she tells him. Let's go back, brother. I will atone for my sins. There's no need to finish him off, just leave him to die, she says to Byakuya before walking off determinedly with tears in her eyes. Fine, I've already shattered his chain of fate and soul sleep. He will be dead soon, and even if he survives he will never be able to use his power again. Byakuya responds. Renji opens a Senkaman and the three walk off into the portal together, leaving Ichigo alone to bleed out onto the pavement. Byakuya looks back, his gaze passing around the area where Hisashi was camouflaged, but then shakes his head and turns around, leading through the Senkaman, which closes behind him. A few moments later, the blonde homeless-looking guy in green Urahara Kasuke shows up and picks up Ichigo and Yuria, taking them away. Hisashi lets out a long drawn-out sigh. Thank God that's all over and nothing went wrong. For a moment there I thought Byakuya knew I was here, he thinks to himself. He stares at where Kasuke took Ichigo. Alright, now that Rukia has been abducted, this guarantees Ichigo will be heading to Soul Society, so I can leave for Hueco Mundo, he decides. He spreads his wings and flies towards where he and Masaki fought. This place is out of the way, and if his plans cause some extra damage, it's already pretty messed up here. Okay, system, stop suppressing the evolution, he thinks. Answer, affirmative. Chapter 38, Evolution. Evolution initiated. Suddenly he felt like a seal inside him broke free, and an immense amount of power is flooding into him, causing him to buckle his knees at the pure pressure. At first it felt amazing, but then slowly it started feeling like he was being torn apart and stitched back together again, over and over and over. His form turned from his iridescent carapace to completely black except for his mask, and everything started growing as he released an amount of energy not even his spirit power concealment was able to fully suppress in such a sudden burst. Evolution completed. Rank, Hollow to Jillian. Strength, 42 to 84. Dexterity, 60. Constitution, 20 to 40. Intelligence, 30. Spirit power, 118,739 to 237,478. Skill, 0 gained. The host fires a powerful blast of concentrated spiritual energy at the target. While in most cases it is fired from the mouth, some Arrancar and Visored can fire Zero from other parts of their bodies, such as their hands, fingers, among others. The power, force, speed, and blast area of the Zero is dependent on the strength, spirit power, and skill of the user. The charging and firing time for Zero varies greatly, from charging relatively fast to firing it to instantaneously firing one without much charging, depending on the user and amount of power used. Skill, Human gained. Allows host to open a portal to Garganta by tearing the barrier between realms, which allows the host to travel between Earth, Hueco Mundo, Soul Society, and other places connected to Garganta. Skill, Negation gained. Negation are square beams which engulf the target in a towering beam of light which completely isolates them from the dimension they are currently in, making it impossible to harm them from the outside of the impenetrable pillar. The field draws those within the beam towards the Minos which created it. Skill, High-speed regeneration to super speed regeneration. improved version of high-speed regeneration that increased the recovery speed. When his senses returned from the massive amount of pain, he had already turned into a Jillian, looking like a massive skyscraper-sized guy wearing a black curtain over his head. He managed to retain his distinctive mask due to his consciousness, which was strengthened to survive the original hollowfication, remaining in control. In his growth, he managed to knock down a not insignificant part of what was left of the forest after his last visit. Ugh, that was unexpected. I need to get out of here in case any Shinigami picked up on that spiritual power release and come to investigate, he thinks to himself. He stabbed through the very fabric of space with his new white hands, using cumin, tearing a portal to Garganta big enough for him to pass through, and closed it behind himself. He found himself in a black space filled with gray clouds. He could vaguely sense the direction of what he believed to be Hueco Mundo. It felt welcoming, kind of like the feeling reminiscent of home. Why did my dexterity not raise while that damned constitution did again? Oh well, nothing I can't fix, he wonders to himself with a frown. A few minutes later, a Shinigami showed up looking around and took some readings. He did capture some hollow spirit power and sent a report using his Hell Butterfly to Soul Society. Hisashi didn't know how long he traveled through the void that was Garganta before he felt he was where he needed to be and ripped open another portal using cumin to pass into Hueco Mundo. He looked around and found himself in what appeared to be the endless white desert under the midnight sky that is the above ground of Hueco Mundo. Dead white trees sparsely populated the dunes around him. Other than that, it all looked completely dead. The other thing he noticed was the massive increase in spirit particles present when compared to Earth. It must have been at least 4 times higher, increasing his passive absorption to another level. The forest of Minos should actually be underground. Should I dig? He asks himself as he looks around, hoping for some kind of cave or hole he might be able to use easier. He tried to extend his spiritual sense as well to find anything of use. Unfortunately, the place wasn't very lively. I guess it's to be expected of Hueco Mundo. The forest of Minos should be more interesting, he thinks. After searching for a while, he gives up and just starts digging straight down. At first it is quite awkward, with him still adjusting to his new giant humanoid form. After 10 years on 4 legs, it took some getting used to. Having hands again was nice though part of him did miss having blades to cut any danger with on him at all times. It takes a while, but eventually the sands shift, revealing an opening Hisashi ends up falling through. He almost forgets he no longer has wings and flails as he falls all the way down. Thankfully, though he lost his wings in this form, he became a lot sturdier, helping him to survive the fall with minimal inconvenience. He is surrounded by what looks to be giant bare gray tree trunks. Somehow the light still seems to be filtering through even though it's underground. Strange, but oh well. Definitely looks like the forest of Minos I'm familiar with, he thinks to himself as he surveys the surroundings. He can't see anything due to the density of the trees, but with his spiritual senses he is already able to locate a few life forms in range. Regular hollow wouldn't be very efficient, as there would only be 1 soul per regular hollow. Meanwhile, each Jillian would contain hundreds of souls. Mission: devour 20 Jillian. Reward: evolve to the next rank. Sweet. So no hundreds this time, though each Jillian is hundreds, so isn't this technically thousands? He wonders. He pays closer attention to his spiritual sense and starts traveling towards the strongest signal that's still weaker than his own. Chapter 39, Hunt. Well, forests are definitely not my favorite places anymore. At least this one looks different enough from the regular ones on Earth, he thinks as he tracks the spirit signature he had decided on. Hisashi eventually came across a trio of Jillian making their way through the forest. He wasn't sure if it was thanks to the system or just the fact that he maintained his consciousness during the evolution, but he was still able to use the skills from before despite being in the Jillian form. He was concealing himself with illusory aura while stalking the trio of Jillian. Illusory aura worked flawlessly, it just seemed to have a massive increase in spirit power consumption, likely due to his equally massive increase in size. Only his energy blade skills seemed to be wasted, as he didn't have any blades in his new form. The 3 Jillian seemed oddly sedate when comparing them to the hollow he was used to dealing with on Earth. Maybe the increased spirit particle density or something else in Hueco Mundo was causing this, making them less hungry for souls while the regular hollow on Earth were effectively starving at all times. He closed in on the group without them being able to notice him as he stalked up behind the one nearest to him. Alright, no time like the present. Let's do this. He tried to psyche himself up for his first battle with Jillian. He activated his blood artery to boost his attack to deliver a crushing surprise attack on his first target. He launched himself towards the first one with so much force the dry ground cracked. The crack was loud enough to gain its attention, but before it was able to respond he had already taken a massive bite out of its mask, taking it out of the battle immediately and started devouring it one massive bite at a time while the other two were still too stunned to react. Thankfully these Jillian were still too stupid to immediately realize there was an invisible foe attacking them. They might even be a decent bit slower than regular hollow in this aspect, probably a side effect of hundreds of hollow souls vying for control rather than having one soul in control. He should keep in mind that it might be different for Jillian with unique masks indicating there is a single soul in control. Plus 40, 500 XP. XP, 53,230 out of 78,080. Plus 1012 Spirit Power. Spirit Power, 237,478 to 238,490. Mission, devour 20 Jillian 1 out of 20. While tearing into the Jillian, the other two both started charging a Zero. He leapt back avoiding one of the Zero which landed where he had been devouring the first Jillian before. The other managed to take a chunk out of his side though. Thankfully it was just a flesh wound. They shouldn't be able to see him, but he started weaving between the trees just to be sure. They let out frustrated hollow roars. It seemed they were at least smart enough to realize that something had attacked them and they didn't get it. With his new and improved super speed regeneration, it had kicked in and for only a little spirit power had already recovered the wound a handful of seconds later. Although he was successful, he really missed his arm blades and the abilities he was able to use with them. If he still had them, just using them in combination with Energy Blade would probably allow him to steamroll these three without even needing the slightest caution. He could use Zero, but them firing two was probably already enough to draw plenty attention without him needing to add more. He circled around the two that were trying to locate him before diving in again, approaching the one that had hit him from behind, grasping its mask and ripping it off forcefully to consume. It didn't even have the remote chance to transform into a pseudo-Arinkar as Hisashi was already devouring his mask and what was left of him. The last Jillian's limited mental capacity finally seemed to catch on that whatever was attacking it was far stronger and it tried to run. Plus 43, 800 XP. XP, 78,080 out of 78,080. Level up. Plus 1 free status point. XP, 18,950 out of 79,250. Plus 1095 Spirit Power. Spirit Power, 238,490 to 239,585. Mission, devour 20 Jillian 2 out of 20. Unfortunately, it didn't take long to finish devouring the second Jillian and run after the last. Though he didn't get a boost in dexterity when transforming into a Jillian, he assumed neither did the other Jillian, because he was still a decent bit faster than them. He concentrated blood artery on his arm and hand, effectively turning it into a deadly spike. He leapt onto the running Jillian and pierced its skull from behind to finish the last one off to devour. Plus 47, 200 XP. XP, 66,150 out of 79,250. Plus 1180 Spirit Power. Spirit Power, 239,585 to 240,765. Mission, devour 20 Jillian 3 out of 20. Alright, they don't go down quite as easily as regular hollow. They have high resistance and their damage output is quite crazy. That Zero barely grazed me, but it went straight through my defenses, but they might actually be a decent bit dumber than regular hollow. At least until one consciousness takes control of their body. I've seen more intelligent animals than these three were. He goes over how the fight went and the conclusions he could draw from it. They also give an insane amount of XP and spirit power though. I'm sure I'll hit a plateau again eventually, but for now this should give me at least a few more levels in days rather than months, he thinks with an excited predatory smile. System, put the free point into dexterity, he tells the system. Answer, affirmative. Host's dexterity has been upgraded by 1 to 61. Alright, time to grind some Jillian before Aizen comes back. If I can manage groups like these regularly, I should be able to hit 20 before then easily, and if Ajucha's is as much of a jump as Jillian was, I will be incomparable to where I was as a basic hollow by then. I already seem to outclass the Jillian I've found so far by a decent amount. Even if I didn't use my illusory aura and their lack of intellect to trick them, I could probably take these three head on, but who would be that stupid, he thinks to himself. Chapter 40, Tracks. The lack of a day and night cycle in the forest of Minos, on top of his lack of sleep and the non-stop hunting and fighting, was making it hard to keep track of time. Hisashi had been cycling through, tracking new prey and devouring them or running if it turned out to be too many over and over. He could go to the surface to get an estimate based on how much the moon phase has changed, but climbing up and out of here in his current form without wings would be a massive pain and his time best spent hunting. He had just devoured a duo of Jillian and knew he must be getting close to completing the mission. System, how long has it been since I came to Hueco Mundo? He asked. Answer, 12 days, 6 hours, 23 minutes, 54 seconds. Ah, never change, system. Never change, he responds sarcastically. At times like these where he was completely cut off from social interaction, he almost wishes he had one of those systems that had a real personality to interact with. Beggars can't be choosers though. Answer, affirmative. He shakes his head with a wry smile. Okay, well, can you show me my status panel? He asks. Plus 720,000 XP from Hollow. Plus 18,000 spirit power from Hollow. Plus 52 spirit power from passive absorption. Plus 6 levels. Plus 6 stat points. Status panel. Name, Saito Hisashi. Soul age, 58. Race, Hollow. Rank, Jillian. Level, 118 to 124. XP, 59,230 out of 86,550. Stats. Strength, 84. Dexterity, 61 to 67. Constitution, 40. Intelligence, 30. Spirit power, 240,765 to 258,817. Available stat points, 0. Passive skills. Spiritual energy absorption. Super speed regeneration. Acidic touch. Active skills. Soul body separation. Spirit power concealment. Illusory aura. Blut. Energy blade. Transcribe. Hachijio Sogai. Zero. Cumin. Negation. What's my progress on the mission? He asks. Mission, devour 20 Jillian, 19 out of 20. Okay, I still have about a week before Aizen should be bailing from Soul Society. System, is it possible to keep stacking experience and stats rather than giving me the evolution as a reward right away? He asks, hoping to maximize his returns since he has some time to spare. Calculating. Answer, possible. Rewards are generated using energy siphon from host's devoured spirit power. Unlike other rewards, the current reward was simply created by foregoing the siphoning of spirit power, in turn speeding up the evolution speed. System is capable of inverting this, increasing the siphoned spirit power and using it to generate an actual reward while slowing evolution progress. Would host like to make this change? Wouldn't this slow my leveling speed, making the whole thing a waste of time? He wonders. Answer, incorrect. Spirit power gains from soul conversion would reduce. Experience is not based on devoured souls though. Then yes, if I could get a reward and grind for a few more days before evolving, that would be even better. I'll leave the adjustments to you, he answered. Answer, affirmative. Mission cancelled. New mission, evolve to Ajucha's. Reward, passive skill Silencioso. While he is discussing these with the system, he notices a few stronger signals approaching from far away. Stronger even than he currently is. He quickly dashed a few hundred feet in the opposite direction. Although he is used to illusory aura, taking care of everything, he wants some extra insurance, so he immediately also performs Hachijio Sogai on his immediate surroundings, creating a second layer of concealment, making him even less likely to be noticed due to the very space he is in being concealed, and making others not want to pay attention to it. A few minutes later, a couple of hollows show up. Probably ajuchas, because they don't look like Jillian and they're too powerful to be basic hollow. One looks like a gray snake, another like a brown and golden lion, and finally a unicorn. They start investigating what's left. Though all the Jillian have already been completely devoured, there are still traces of the battle. They are unknowingly completely ignoring the space that Hisashi is in due to Hachijio Sogai, as it forces their focus away. Where is it? We've been tracking for days and still seem to be no closer, the unicorn says in annoyance. Calm your hooves. They might not be here, but the tracks are fresher, the snake responds condescendingly. I can smell it a little, but the trail dies here, the lion says. Hisashi feels nervous and relieved he didn't hesitate to deploy the barrier, since his illusion doesn't cover his scent even if it is less distinct as a hollow. Some hollow do have enhanced senses that can still pick up on it. Meanwhile, the barrier affects all senses, making it seem like the things inside simply don't exist. See, we're still just running around, the unicorn says. Shut it! Your impatience isn't helping us investigate this any faster, the snake says, getting annoyed at the unicorn. Whatever, it responds to her and starts ignoring her in favor of looking around. The snake just shakes its head and starts ignoring the unicorn and looks at the lion instead. Okay, we were told to investigate and find out the sudden increase in disappearing Jillian. Obviously it's not a coincidence, as we've already found a few places of combat like this, so it's not a one-off. Any luck in tracking it from your side? She asks it. No, I can vaguely smell it here around the marks, but then it just vanishes into thin air, she says, her head lower, seeming disappointed in herself. We'll figure this out. We're getting closer and closer after all, the snake says with determination, slightly lifting the lion's spirits. Looking at the power and destruction used, obviously it has to be at least a Jillian in strength, but they're generally too dumb for this. So it's probably a new ajuchas or desperate ajuchas hoping for some fast meals, she tries to reason. The lion nods in agreement, but the unicorn just seems to be strolling around. Saying she was investigating was a stretch. Finally they left, leaving a relieved Hisashi waiting in his barrier for them to leave the range of his spiritual senses. That's the end of this tale for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in part 3.